Subtle energies all go faster than light. Now, I'll ask you to visualize a reaction equation, as if you've got a blackboard in front of you, and I'll write mass with arrows back and forth to energy. That is basically what we've done for the last 400 years in orthodox science. And the connection link is Einstein's E equals mc squared. Well, now we want to expand traditional science to include human consciousness. Our experiments show that works now in this world we live in. But we don't all agree what consciousness is. So let's not ask what consciousness is, let's ask what consciousness does.
Astronaut Edgar Mitchell found that consciousness has a better quality signal in space. Scientific studies seem to confirm that consciousness travels instantaneously over any distance. At least it appears that way over the known Earth to Sun maximum distances measured thus far. Dr. William Tiller calculates that due to the fact that consciousness cannot be blocked by any barrier, including lead and mountains of rock, which are capable of blocking the highest frequency gamma rays, consciousness must be of a higher frequency than the gamma ray spectrum to allow it to penetrate these barriers. Also, in order for consciousness to appear to travel instantaneously over Earth to Sun distances, it would have to at least travel at the speed of light squared, which is 34.7 billion miles per second.
Oh, the theory is that they all travel faster than the velocity of light, and that's why they're non-observable. And the magnetoelectric energy, its top velocity from my theory is that it's c squared. So it goes from c to c squared.
Dr. Tiller's new model of consciousness has multi-dimensions. It starts with the second chakra being capable of sending consciousness as coherent information at a frequency beyond the gamma ray spectrum in the magnetoelectric spectrum, with wavelengths so tiny and frequencies so high they could penetrate any subatomic barrier. This level of consciousness can send coherent information at the speed of light squared, or 34.7 billion miles per second. Since the Sun is approximately 93 million miles from Earth, consciousness would appear to travel from the Sun to the Earth in a tiny fraction of a second, 1/373rd.
Whereas if you go to the next level, the emotion domain level, it's sort of c squared to c cubed.
Dr. Tiller's second level of consciousness, emanating from the heart center, allows coherent information to travel at the speed of light cubed, or 64.64 quadrillion miles per second. This is a level of cosmic proportions. As the speed of light travels 5.87 trillion miles per year, and the Pleiades star system is 440 light years away from Earth, or 2.58 quadrillion miles, it would take ordinary light, or radio messages, 440 years to get there. But consciousness, at this level of realization, traveling 64.64 quadrillion miles per second, could travel the 2.58 quadrillion miles to the Pleiades star system in 1/4 of a second.
If you go to the mind level, it's c cubed to c to the fourth.
Dr. Tiller's next level of consciousness, emanating from the crown chakra and higher, allows coherent information to travel to the Andromeda galaxy, 2.5 million light years from Earth, in a fraction of a second. At this level of realization, we attain ultra-cosmic consciousness. This means, at these higher levels of realization, we can create a dialogue with other galaxies. The answer to how we can attain coherency, total perfect harmonic consciousness in each of our energy centers, is inside of our biology.
Very interesting fact in biology is that no two human beings are the same. And I can say that from a biological expression in regard to a simple observation. If you take cells or organs out of your body and put them into anybody else's body, those cells and organs will be rejected by that individual because their immune system will recognize it as not self. So basically it says each one of us has a self. And what was very interesting in understanding the nature of the cell's nervous system, the relationship of the membrane to the cell, was that on the surface of our cells are groups of antennas or receptors. A group of them specifically studied by medicine are referred to as self receptors. And to me, that's a very profound title for these particular receptors, self receptors, receivers of self. So why this is relevant is that these receptors that receive an identity are on the outer surface of the cell. The relevance to that is that whatever the self signal is, it is out in the environment and picked up by these receptors. Significance to my perception in this is that our identities are not within our biology. Our identities are part of a field, and that our biology downloads this information from the field. So the significance is that when we talk about our personal identity, we can talk about that identity isolated and localized with our physical body. But we could also talk about the same information or identity that is present in the field. So for example, Cleve Baxter did some wonderful experiments where he took cells from an individual, put them in a culture dish, and separated those cells from that individual by a distance of 40 or more miles. And what he had was an experiment where he put electrical devices to read the electrical activity of the cells in the culture dish. At the same time, he was reading the electrical activity, for example, the EEG activity of the donor of those cells who was 40 miles away. What he recognized is that if the individual had an emotional experience at that moment, the individual cells would also have an identical kind of activity occur instantaneously at the same time, even though they were 40 miles away. The relevance about this is really very supportive of the fact that the identity is not localized within the body. The identity is part of the field and spread all over the surface of the planet. Significance is this, is that then two people have two physical bodies and they can interact, but they also have two environmental identifications, meaning some kind of energy in the field that is unique to them. Since the field is all entangled and integrated with each other all over the world, that means people are never really separated from each other by physical distances in regard to their personal identity, even though their bodies may be separated. So basically, the nature of people communicating with each other is to recognize that individual identities as vibrational frequencies in a field can interact with each other, especially if there's something called harmonic resonance, meaning the two frequencies share wavelengths together so that when they come together, they vibrate together. And this is how people can actually feel other people that are closely related to them, because they can pick up the vibration of the other individual in that there's a complementarity between them and the person they're communicating with. So the significance is we have an opportunity to interact on a non-physical plane through the identity that is in the field. And this is very important because it is not localized to space or time, that people can communicate over vast differences on this planet at exactly the same moment of time.
In our current science, there are four basic forces: electromagnetism, gravity, and the strong and the weak forces which occur in the nucleus, and they hold the nucleus of atoms together. And in our physics research, we've been learning how to unify these forces to some extent, and there's now a standard model that has a way of putting together three of them to some extent. But in current physics, there's an attitude that this pretty much explains everything you need to know in the universe. Unfortunately, that idea is based on the fact that our knowledge of physics comes from high energy particle experiments. Scientists take elementary particles and bang them together at high speed, and they watch what happens, and they say, well, that's the universe, okay? That's what we have to explain. And our current model does a pretty good job of explaining that. What they've overlooked are a lot of other phenomena that they don't tend to study. And if you take the example I mentioned of ESP or psychic connections, that's one area which says that there are forces and ways of interacting that can't be explained by that four-force model.
When scientists measure the capabilities of subtle energy or the psychic force, it outperforms all of the other forces. Today, we store and transmit information through radio and television waves. This kind of information is likened to human consciousness, but it doesn't possess all of its qualities. Consciousness is still unique and more powerful. Radio waves and microwaves are used to broadcast voices and television pictures at the speed of light. The problem is these electromagnetic signals get weaker over distance and can distort or collapse when trying to move through solid barriers such as walls, metal, or even mountains. After conducting hundreds of tests, scientists have discovered that subtle energy, the psychic force, is capable of penetrating any dimension, barrier, or distance with no loss in signal quality, even through vast distances in space.
The Princeton Pear Lab experiments have also shown that people's minds have the ability to affect things at a distance. They take a device called a random event generator, which makes a sequence of random ones and zeros or yeses and nos based on a quantum circuit. What they have shown is that the mind can affect how that object behaves, what the stream of ones and zeros looks like. And it does not depend how far away you are from the person influencing the experiment. Even thousands of miles away, a person is able to affect the results just as well. So we have an ability to exert a force on distant objects that does not fall into any of the known category of forces. This new force goes through barriers that would normally stop the known forces. It even acts backwards in time in certain types of experiments. This new force, the Russians have called torsion. It's known by a variety of different names. It may be the same thing as what the Chinese call qi, the essence of Chinese medicine. It appears to affect space and time, and by doing so, it affects all the other forces, and it really calls for a new re-examination of physics. Bill Tiller has called this raising the gauge.
Dr. William Tiller has conducted hundreds of tests proving that human consciousness or intention can affect the pH value of water over any distance and through any barrier or dimension.
Well, let's start with the unstated assumption that's been existing in science for 400 years, since the days of Descartes, and that is that no human qualities of consciousness, intention, emotion, mind, or spirit can significantly influence a well-designed target experiment in physical reality. And so in '97, I set out to seriously test that assumption, having received some important funding from a private source. And so the idea was to design 4 target experiments, set them up with all the kinds of controls you would have in any normal orthodox science experiment, and to then introduce consciousness into the experimental medium. The 4 experiments were the intention was to increase the pH of water by 1 full pH unit with no chemical additions. And the water was in equilibrium with air. The second target experiment was to decrease the pH of the same water by 1 pH unit with no chemical additions, and again in equilibrium with air. And in both cases, the accuracy of the measurement instruments were plus or minus 0.01 pH units. So we were asking for a signature which was the order of 100 times the noise.
First, Dr. Tiller did experiments applying direct human intention to water and got positive results. He then was able to capture a human intention as if in a computer hard drive and a bioelectrical intention host device with the instructions to raise or lower a pH value in water. Regardless of distance, repeatedly, the intention was able to affect the pH value in water.
Within 3 weeks, the pH had gone up 1 pH unit. And then 3 months later, the Milan folks weighed in, and we said the same thing to them. To be part of the experiment, we wanted them to just measure background. And we used it as a control site for, again, the 3 active sites. And within 1 week, the pH went up 1.7 pH units. And we looked at our data. We found in one of the control sites in Missouri, it was underground, and there the pH had gone up 1.7 pH units. So what we gathered, not only was there information entanglement over as much as 6,000 miles, but that if the measurement site was below ground, the pH went up more than 1 pH unit. If it was 3 stories up in the air, as it was in Bethesda and Baltimore, it only went up 0.8 pH units. But if it was at ground level, it went up 1 pH unit, which was the level where we first made the imprint intention into the devices.
Another amazing quality the psychic force exhibits is no distortion between sender and receiver. That means the lines of communication remain private.
Well, I'm Gary Schwartz, and I'm currently a professor of psychology, medicine, neurology, psychiatry, and surgery at the University of Arizona, where I direct a laboratory for advances in consciousness and health. And I direct a team of people doing research that essentially integrates body, mind, and spirit. I've been doing a lot of research in the area of energy healing and consciousness that involves energy and also extends beyond us. So where one person's consciousness and energy can affect the physiology, biochemistry, cellular function, and conscious experience of someone else, either locally in a close proximity or even hundreds or thousands of miles away. And that's summarized in my new book, The Energy Healing Experiments. Well, we've done many kinds of experiments to look at both local and non-local or distal effects of intention on healing. One area of research involves what's called biophoton imaging, where we literally, using a supercooled camera, it's cooled anywhere from minus 70 to minus 100 degrees centigrade. These cameras were originally designed to look out into deep space, to photograph galaxies we cannot see with the naked eye. Well, we began to wonder if we could use these cameras to actually image living systems. So instead of looking out into space, we're looking at biology. And we began working with plants. And one of the many reasons for working with plants, besides they're fundamental to life and they relate to light, and we are very much part of connect with the plant community. But plants are also very easy to work with because they can sit in the dark for long periods of time. They sit still. And so therefore you can get very good images of the light that the plants emit. And what we found is that not only can we measure the light that's coming out of the plants, which you cannot see with the naked eye, but we can measure auras that are actually surrounding the plants. So you can see the light that's going on around the plants. Then we can actually see how the plants interact with light. So for example, if you have 2 geranium leaves, one next to the other, and you take a long exposure, you can actually see the extension of the light, and it's like lightning grabbing one another and caressing one another. You actually see the light beams connecting the two, which again has never before been seen. Now you can take healers, and healers can, for example, send healing intentions to a leaf, or they can be specifically asked to say, can you enable the leaf to glow more? And we could actually show that people who are trained as healers can actually, without touching the leaves, with their intention, send an intention for the leaves to spontaneously glow more. And then we can place them in this completely dark chamber where these images are obtained, and lo and behold, discover that the leaves are glowing. Now, you take that one step further, and you could say, well, what about people from a distance? Could people do this 10 miles away? Could they do this 100 miles away, or even 1,000 miles away? And with Lynn McTaggart, who wrote the book The Field and has written a new book called The Intention Experiment, we've been doing long-distance experiments where, for example, a group of 400 people in England will, together as a group for 10 minutes, send an intention to a leaf in Tucson in my laboratory to glow. And we'll have two leaves. We'll call them leaf A and B. Each leaf has been injured. It's been, little holes have been placed in it, 16 of them in a 4x4 grid, because when you injure a leaf, it actually glows more, because when there's injury, there's actually the healing response involves energy. And then what we do is we have two video cameras, cam recorders, picking up the images of each of the leaves and then sending by the internet to England. Now, someone in the audience flips a coin and it comes out randomly heads or tails, and let's say they pick leaf B. At this point, the image from Tucson being sent to London of leaf B is now on the screen. And now 400 people can simultaneously send glowing intentions to the leaf that they see. Meanwhile, my research assistant in Tucson, Mark, he's blind to which leaf has been selected. Okay? After the 10 minutes, Mark is then asked to take the leaves and put them into the biophoton imaging system so we can collect these long exposure images of the leaves. And then they're blindly scored before we break the code to find out what happens. And much to my absolute amazement, sure enough, if leaf B was selected from a distant group and they could actually see the leaf, they're able to affect the glowing of that leaf compared to a match control.
German physicist Fritz Albert Popp proved the existence of biophotons, that all living organisms, including humans, had auras that transmitted and received intelligent signals. He also found that plants communicate at a distance with one another by their transmissions and receptions of biophotons. This digital photograph of a giant palm tree shows something extraordinary that appeared invisible to the naked eye. A 2 to 3 foot wide orb of plasma light. It even has a green plasma membrane, kind of like a giant cell. Are plants in communication with invisible beings of light? Could we be in communication through Einstein's action at a distance with our future soul matches as friends, loves, husbands, wives, teachers, business partners, and spiritual mentors before we meet in person for the first time? Could this communication be happening based on our current thoughts, feelings, patterns, and our personal energy signature?
Creating a dialogue with your soulmate before you meet them is very important, because a lot of us may feel that maybe our soulmate isn't really out there, and so in the back of your mind you hope for it, but it's not active in your day-to-day life. And it's important to put those messages out that that is what you're looking for. You're not going to settle for anything else when you clear your space and you're totally open to receive your soulmate. And when you do your soul work on a daily basis and you put the feeling tone of finding your soulmate in that space, all of those things are essential to communicating with your soulmate before you actually meet them. You have to believe that your soulmate can hear you, because if you don't believe it and you're just saying, oh, I'm going to put out this message, if you're actually there or not, I don't know, but I'll just say that I'm ready and, you'll hear me. It doesn't work that way. You have to truly believe that they can hear you and send a clear message to them in order for the line of communication to meet them instantly, because that is not only a leap of faith, but it also creates a clear signal so that nothing, no doubts, no resistance are interfering with that signal. If you have a doubt and interference through that, not being sure, then it won't be an instant message. It'll be, it'll come to a stop sign at some point. So it's really important to have faith and true belief that your soulmate can hear you when you're sending out those feeling tones and those messages of I'm ready for you, and mirroring that in your actions on your day-to-day basis.
Dr. Bruce Lipton has made a remarkable discovery by observing how biological cells can be in communication with one another at a distance.
There's an interesting understanding in biology about how one can separate proteins in a mixture which contains thousands of different proteins. And basically how it works is you take a drop of this mixture of thousands of different proteins, you put it on a surface of a gel. And what you do is run an electric current through this gel surface. And what happens is, because each protein has its own unique vibrational frequency and mass to it, each protein responds to the field with its own unique characteristics. So as a result of putting the proteins in a field, it causes the proteins to move in that field. Some proteins move faster than other proteins, so the net result is that the proteins actually begin to sort themselves out on a petri dish. And ultimately, if you continue doing this, you can identify individual clusters of proteins that share common characteristics because they will move at the same rate of speed on this gel. We apply this to an understanding of humans as protein mechanisms. Each one of us has our own unique identifying frequency to it. Each one of us on the surface of the earth is like a protein on the gel. Interestingly enough, the field forces around us, the invisible forces, influence our movement on the surface. So during our lives, we move across the surface of the planet from one place to another, and ultimately, if we share vibrational frequencies with other people, it's inevitable that at some point we will ultimately cross paths, just as proteins do in what is called chromatography or gel electrophoresis. So basically, it's a very interesting understanding that we will ultimately meet up, if we continue our movements, with people that share our vibrational frequencies. And there are very exciting opportunities when we do, because at that moment, when you start to encounter the person that has a complementary frequency to you, the harmonic resonance actually empowers your own vibration. We call it good vibes. And in that regard, you can actually identify people that are in some way related to you and your harmonics, because if their vibration is similar to you, the two of them coming together is called constructive interference, which empowers each of the individuals, and that empowerment is physically felt as much more energy in your body. And we refer to this as I mentioned, as good vibes, so that we actually have a sensory system and awareness of when people that are very similar to us or supportive or complementary to us come into our field. I should also acknowledge that there are other people who actually cancel our energies just as well. That's called destructive interference, so that when some people come together, they actually lose energy and feel weaker, and we refer to that as bad vibes. So the nature of our communications are, there's a vibrational communication that precedes our verbal communication.
As we realize we are communicating in the present moment with our future soul matches, business partners, mentors, spiritual teachers, and even God at a distance, we can understand how to co-create our own reality. Once we understand the concept that we are constantly broadcasting our personal energy signature into the field, and we're also receiving messages from the field, we can see how we can focus and actually attract not only our soulmates and soul matches, but our future business partners, and actually creating a future career for ourselves that is more harmonious to who we really are. We can also see how we can use the field to attract our spiritual teachers. We want to find teachers that resonate with where we want to go in our spirituality, regardless of our religion. But also, how we can use the field to create a dialogue with the universe itself. So whether we're an architect, an astronomer, a biologist, a medical doctor, a musician, an artist, or even a student, by creating this dialogue with the super intelligent levels of the field and expanding our consciousness ultimately into the 9 levels of the cosmos, the 9 levels of the angelic and the 9 levels of the field, we can get the answers to anything we can imagine. The cure for AIDS, the cure for biofuels, the next biofuels. We can find the secrets to nuclear fusion. We can find the secrets to unlimited zero-point energy. We can find the secrets to the next song, the next generation of music. All of that information is available to us in this field if we can tap into it. We can even begin to formulate a dialogue to awaken our own inner genius and true potential.
One of the ways that we can access entering a more quantum, broader field range of awareness, a more expansive state of awareness, is to begin to encourage ourselves to see things not so much in terms of concepts and ideas, but more in terms of pure energy itself. So that you begin to perceive what is normally, you would label it and you'd say, wow, that's a rose, or that's a car, or that's a tree. You would just begin to teach yourself, guide yourself into feeling the pure energy of that experience, as though you were in a state of innocent wonder. So what this does is that it frees your whole cortical field. It's like just because you detach yourself from looking at the world in terms of ideas doesn't mean you lose those ideas. What it does is it helps you to free your informational field up, so that now when you encourage yourself to go into really deep states of peaceful, quiet, core being relaxation quiet, when you learn to penetrate to the very core essence of the quantum field itself, what you start to feel is an incredible harmonic peacefulness. So we have a meditation which encourages you to enter into that state of pure, unattached to ideas, pure energy awareness, complete, peaceful, brilliant stillness. And as you enter that, what we now know from studies of creative genius, that it's often exactly when we're in the most relaxed, most sort of open-minded spaces that we begin our brain process, because it's now free. It's suddenly like the electrical circuitry is no longer confined to our old thought spaces, so that our cortex can suddenly flash up with something like akin to a super light. Like the light of our awareness within our awareness field can suddenly flash into our whole brain field in a much more core contextual way, and we start to holographically insight instead of think. We start to get picture images. We start to see potential solutions that are way more holographic. For a description of the difference between holographing and thinking, if you were to think of say a round basketball, and if you were to take a 1 diameter slice of that basketball in an attempt to understand a whole field of information, what you would end up with is with 2 polarized opposites. You would have like an either or a right or a left position, or a good or a bad position. And you'd have an argument, because you've polarized the informational field. And you tend to look at that informational field in terms of being somewhere along that band. I'm in the center, I'm on the right, I'm on the left. Whereas when we insight, if you could picture that same ball, guess how many diameters there are inside of a whole field of information? There's an infinite number of diameters that you can put through a whole field. So the difference between thinking and insighting is when you let the core of that circle of information, which is your brain field, you allow the energy to expand in every direction simultaneously from the core to the boundaries. You get an instantaneous flash of insight. You get a hologram. Suddenly you see solutions in terms of a huge, like, wow. And this is exactly how Einstein incited the theory of relativity. It came to him in an instant. It took him 2 years to try to explain what he saw in that instant through conventional linear sequential logics. So what we're talking about is teaching people, opening people to a new level of awareness in which they begin to support their intelligence field, to jump into quantum field holographing as opposed to thinking.
If we awaken to the idea that the universe itself is intelligent, could we create a dialogue with it? What is the universal language? How can we learn to listen to the cosmic conversation? Many scientific studies at top universities around the world have confirmed that consciousness can affect the structure of water. Water has been demonstrated to have memory in numerous studies that our thoughts and feelings can be recorded by water. As water is made of 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen, we can deduct that hydrogen has memory. Our bodies are made of nearly 90% water, trace minerals, and oxygen. Our sun is also made of the same stuff we are made of, 91% hydrogen, helium, trace oxygen, and trace minerals. Hydrogen was created less than 100 seconds after the Big Bang, the creation of the universe, and established itself as the most abundant element in the entire universe. The massive spiral arms of the Milky Way galaxy, its hundreds of billions of stars and planets, are made mostly of hydrogen. 75% of the visible mass of our galaxy is made of hydrogen. While hydrogen has memory, could our galaxy's spiral arms, the sun, and the billions of stars in the Milky Way galaxy actually hold all of the cosmic memories of its entire history? Could this be where the great Akashic records archiving all of human history are held? What if we could create a dialogue with this enormous memory system? We could know the answer to any question and solve any problem or any limitation.
The language that the spiritual people, and spiritual people meaning that the medicine people, the different religious groups within the Zuni tribe, when they go into a religious communication system, they talk about the origins of who they are talking to. In a lot of cases, especially in the medicine world, is that they're talking about the star people and all the other related priests. They call them priesthood. In one, for example, in one section of the prayer system, there's a specific line or a phrase or a group of within a prayer that talks strictly about the night beings and in the upper world priesthood. They call it. That's the only one that is referenced as a male and female entity, and the sky people, the night people priesthood, and the finish line in that is that they only appear instantaneously. That's one line in the prayer system. There are so many different parts to the prayer system depending on the specialty of that particular medicine group.
Is there a language of the universe, a language if uttered with perfection, the secret forces of the universe could be activated? When we examine some of the most ancient languages in the history of the world, such as ancient Hebrew, the Vedas, Aramaic, and the Native American Indian dialects, we find that these prayers were designed to invoke spiritual, healing, and powerful forces of the conscious universe.
What I mean by that is that during the nighttime, the night priesthood, including the female, they come, and also that I'm talking about the priesthood of the universe. They only come and show themselves instantaneously, is what that passage means when you're doing our prayers. When we communicate them with directly, that is the prayer that they use. The language of the Zuni is a very unique language in that there is no other Indian tribe that has any connection with the Zuni language. The Zuni is a standalone language system as determined by the people that study the languages and trying to connect it with other Indian tribes, say like the Hopi or the existing Pueblo tribes around Albuquerque, New Mexico, and even clear down to the Azteco Inca tribes. And the ethnologists and the linguists have never found any connection to any of the Zuni language, so it's a standalone system by itself as far as the language is concerned.
Do all ancient dialects go back to the same source, the sounds of nature and the sounds of the universe itself?
Well, Pleiades, what took me some time to understand is that in the prayer system, they talk about all the different directions. Not only is it the internal part of the earth, the different directions, the 6 directions of the earth, boundaries, the up and down, the east and west, and north and south, and so on. And in the when they start talking, giving prayer to those people that are in the upper world, it starts out with what the Zunis refer to as the rock roof, and they're referred to as priests or gods. The rock roof, then the next one is the moon and the sun, the Big Dipper, and as it goes up, then it talks about the 7. The 7 took me a long time to figure out that was referring to Pleiades. Pleiades having got 7 star group or whatever it is. And then above that is the supernova group. And depending on the specific functions of the medicine order society, then again it expands into other star systems, and also certain parts of certain stars stars or planets in the universe, depending on what their specific order is or their medicine group is. And those are kept pretty well secret among those societies. In Zuni, even though the medicine orders are the same, the specific groups have their own references, and sometimes we don't know what the other society references are. And but so that's but in the case of Pleiades, it's very specific.
That's incredible. So you're saying the elders could talk to gods or goddesses from different star systems?
Yes.
The ancient Hebrew name of God is the name that cannot be uttered or heard by the human ear because it has no vowels to move air through it. The name literally cannot be uttered or heard by the human ear unless vowels are introduced to it. The phonetics of the letters YH, WH produce a sound so low in frequency it cannot be heard.
Okay, and my modeling, which I developed from a deep meditative state in the early 1970s, the model that eventually appeared to me, which I wrote down in my first psychoenergetic book, which I didn't publish for about 30 years, that was in 1997, and that was Science and Human Transformation, Subtle Energies, Intentionality, and Consciousness. So in that, I draw a Minkowski diagram with the standard cone kind of thing, but there are several cones where the events occur inside the normal light cone of Minkowski is the coordinates of distance and time. The limitation of the walls on the cone is velocity of light, c. The next one, the limits, which is the magnetic information wave domain, is c squared. The next one, which is the emotion domain, is c cubed. And the next one, at the mind domain, c to the fourth. And beyond that, spirit. So, again, until you can make measurements, we will not be able to check these kinds of things. But they're internally self-consistent with a variety of stuff. And they give us a lot of hope and optimism that if we will ever get out of this box that orthodox science is stuck in, then they will have a marvelous, marvelous adventure in learning more about nature. Is the power of meditation so profound that we can expand our consciousness into the cosmos and perceive the actual sound of the sun and the universe?
Yeah, one of the fascinating things about psychic phenomena is that they seem to travel much faster than light. And a piece of evidence to back that up, and there are actually now several experiments, but the first one that I learned about was by a Russian scientist named Podshibian, probably back in the 60s, I believe. He was working with acupuncture and measuring the voltages on the acupoints on the body. Acupuncture, as you know, there are certain points on the body that the Chinese medicine stipulates have certain electrical properties. As Podshibian was measuring the voltages, he saw a curious spike in them and wondered what the cause of the spike was. Later he learned there had been a solar flare at the moment that he saw this voltage spike. What was strange is that the spike occurred 8.3 minutes before we would be able to see that solar flare, because light travels, at a limited speed. It takes 8.3 minutes for light to get from the sun to the earth. But his spikes showed up instantaneously. So this is the first evidence that there's something that travels much faster than light that affects the body and affects the acupuncture system, and we can measure it physically. Since then, the Russians have done a lot of work on what they call torsion, which is their version of the same psychic force. And they do find there's an element of that does travel much faster than light, so that now even telescopes have been devised which can measure this energy, and they show that signal does travel faster than light. So this is, again, another revolutionary aspect of physics that most Western scientists are just ignoring, but it's really important.
Our bodies are made of about 90+% water, which is hydrogen, oxygen, and we're also made of minerals and carbon. The sun is made of over 90% hydrogen, trace oxygen, and trace minerals and helium. It's made of almost the same stuff we are. So inversely, if the sun can send us telepathic messages faster than the speed of light, we can send the sun telepathic messages faster than the speed of light. And what that means is, every 11 years, according to NASA, we come into solar maximums where solar flares are a potential threat to our planet. If we can learn to pray and talk to the sun as a living being, not as a god, not as the god of creation, but if we can talk to the sun as a living being, can we collectively, with billions of minds together, ask the sun to calm itself, to harmonize itself with us, and not to harm us? Can we do that? Are our collective minds that powerful? If we consider Dr. Tiller's model once again, realizing that consciousness is operating in a domain beyond the gamma ray spectrum, consciousness has the power to create a universe. Considering a short 10-second gamma ray burst from a supernova will release more energy than our sun will in its entire multi-billion-year lifetime, consciousness in the magneto-electric spectrum and beyond is even more powerful than that. If we could access this through coherent awareness, we could become like gods and goddesses.
To me, we are all spirits having a physical experience as we ride the river of life together. Our spiritual parents dressed us in these bio-body suits, put us in this playpen that we call a universe, in order to grow in coherence, in order to develop our gifts of intentionality, and in order to become what we were intended to become, co-creators with our spiritual parents. And co-creator means to eventually evolving to the place where you could interact with planets and you could co-create planets or stars. So it's in the game as far as I see it. We're not anywhere near the end of physics, the theory of everything. We're just babes crawling across the floor of the universe. We've hardly begun the great adventure. And all of these things are possible. We manipulate this universe. That's why it's here for us. It's our classroom. No other way to become co-creators on this magnificent scale. But that's in our future from this planet's level of activity. We have to move and become coherent at the deeper levels of nature.
Using Einstein's equation of converting frequencies into mass energy, the higher the frequency, the higher the energy. Any frequency into the gamma ray spectrum, the magneto-electric spectrum and beyond, coupled with matter, has the power to create anything we can imagine, including the solar system, the galaxy, and the universe.
The coherence at this level of nature is very good. I mean, we can make lasers. We can convert the potential of a light bulb from 50 watts to create temperatures 10 times the surface of the sun if you could make all those photons, electromagnetic photons, coherent. But the dimensionality of the higher dimensions, just as this one, okay, if you look at the most coherent aspect for electromagnetic laser is the wavelength of the light you're dealing with. So, but now if you go to the next level of the vacuum, magnetic information wave level, you've changed the size scale by 10 orders of magnitude. And then to the next level, another 10 orders of magnitude. And the next level, another 10 orders of magnitude. And so to be coherent at those inner levels, really coherent, the energy densities are beyond your imagining. So it isn't just that it goes c squared, c cubed, c to the fourth. The size scale goes down and down and down. The wavelength goes up and up and up. And the power, ultimately, is huge. So in principle, all of the things I've talked about appear to be possible.
It is information at this level of reality that tells matter what to do. Consciousness at the magneto-electric spectrum and beyond can also power a spacecraft at the speed of light squared and beyond. Does this give us a new understanding and a new vision of God? When you make the two into one, you will become children of Adam. And when you say, mountain, move from here, it will move. Jesus, the Gospel of Thomas. By tapping into just a small amount of this consciousness, certainly we could change the weather, and we could talk to the sun to ask it to do anything.
Imagine for a moment if a hurricane was coming in the future. But now, as people, instead of what we're doing with the weather forecasts, which is we're amplifying the fear and we're looking at all the blowing of the winds and all the torment and so on, imagine instead we had millions or billions of people simultaneously engaged in an organized, synchronized, guided imagery over the media of sending loving intentions and calming intentions to a storm, or even was redirecting it to a safer environment. Would we find that the storm was diminished? Would we find that the storm might be moved? Well, we'll never discover it unless we look for it. If we don't ask the questions and we don't try it, we'll never know whether it matters or not.
The key to talking to nature is to know its harmonic language. When we examine this photo of ordinary water, flash frozen while it was exposed to the sound of the sun, we can see it transforms from its ordinary state of disorder into the most perfect sacred geometry. Is there a purpose to the sun's sound waves broadcasting throughout the solar system? Is it a sort of language? Does the sound of the sun bring order to the 9 planets? Pythagoras discovered that all of the planets were producing a sort of cosmic music he called the music of the spheres. When NASA recorded the sounds of Saturn, researchers were in awe. The sound of Uranus. The sound of Jupiter. The sound of the earth. When we hear the sound of the earth, we can see it sounds deeply similar to the sounds of birds singing. NASA scientists were astounded when they heard the sounds of the earth for the first time, because they knew the birds understood this secret language of the universe and the earth itself. They were singing as if in a dialogue with the creation. When Pythagoras had finished his studies into the music of the planets, he gave birth to the intervallic system of modern music, and thus classical music was born.
Yeah, the musica instrumentalis, of course, is the music we hear people sing or instruments play, and then the musica humana Pythagoras said, is our sound, the one that we create, that humans create. Now, the Musica Mundana is the one that you're describing here, and that's the music of the spheres. And that music, let's not think that it has to sound like music, because really it can just be a very out of this world one note sound that sounds like one note but actually spreads out into incredible harmonies. And the way you reach that point is truly by meditating, or by going to a place, hiking to a place where you can be by yourself. If you don't like meditating, just sitting quietly. But it is a place that you reach when you're quiet. You can't hear these sounds, these harmonies of the spheres. You can't hear them unless you've actually, integrated into your heart center. It's just not possible, because that's where the sound comes in. And so again, the idea of using your intuition, your sixth sense, this is what we're all getting into now. This whole new millennium, I believe, is about activating that again and combining all the knowledge we have, letting go of it, and allowing our hearts to listen to what's really out there. And really where it begins, not so you don't feel like this is a very complicated process, where it begins is to hear your own inner voice. That's really key, is when you hear yourself giving the answers, not somebody outside of yourself, not the media, not your husband or wife, your friend, your family telling you what to do, but you actually tune in to yourself. And once you start tuning in, you have tuned to the music of the spheres. The tuning in is what's necessary to hear the great cosmic music that's out there, which is all about you, because you're part of creation. You're creating this music. So tuning in will allow you to not only hear it, but also to participate in it as well. And again, it differs for everybody as to how that happens.
Music is, for me, it's a frequency, it's an energy. I feel it, the emotion of the song. I actually can sense the signature of a song without knowing where it's coming from, but it's given to me. So is it a talent, is it an aptitude? I think I'm a receiver for this. I receive songs. I hear them, I hear the whole parts of it too, so I hear it fully formed. So my inspiration always comes with a life experience. For me, I write songs about God and humanity. Those are always my two subjects, the sense of separateness that the human being feels, and how we try to regain that connection through relationships, romantic relationships, and how that, or things or whatever, and how that disappoints us, and that how there is really only God. So a lot of my songs, you can re-listen to them about healing. You'll hear me talk about what sounds like a relationship when really I'm talking about a relationship with a higher power. But I'm always surprised actually afterwards. But again, it's usually something that I'm thinking about and I want to speak to, so I allow this to be spoken to through the song.
Into your shoes. About these stains here on my wings. Price was right for these unnatural things. They make it easier to hide.
Jesus spoke the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic, a language that is at least 3,000 years old. Was this language also consistent with tonalities of the hidden forces of creation? Was Jesus' intention combined with Aramaic language so powerful he could manifest the loaves and fishes needed to feed the masses? The shape of a fish in geometry is the Vesica Pisces, formed when two circles of the same diameter cross one another. The ratio of a vesica Pisces width to its height is 153 to 265, or the square root of 3, the number of the Trinity. In the Gospel of John 21:11, Jesus caught 153 fish at a time when the disciples could not catch a single one. The question is, why is the number 153 in code with the creation of the shape of a fish? Was Jesus speaking in a harmonic code language to manifest the loaves and fishes? Did he know the secret language of creation itself?
People ask me all the time, where are you, what is divine dialogue and who are you talking to? Now, it really depends on what you believe. There's a friend of mine who believes that Jesus comes to him. As a matter of fact, it's you, David. I don't do Jesus like that. It's like my belief. Oh, and then another friend of mine, is a devout Roman Catholic and an extraordinary medium, and they believe they're talking to Mother Mary. So I believe that the consciousness of those avatars, if you will, the consciousness of those extraordinary beings, who even knows if they were human or not, right? We don't know, but that is living, and we can tap into that, but it sure isn't in us. I can say that information can come through me. So is this the white guy God in the sky? Well, I'm going to say no way. But am I right about that? Well, I don't know. I don't know that. But I do believe that there is an extraordinary matrix of creativity, a living consciousness, a divine intelligence that I don't know what it is. And I can only understand that intelligence through a subjective experience when I have that genius moment and I know it doesn't come from me. And, the other thing too is that there are so many studies now that are trying to find that. What is God? What is the great organizing designer? We really need to step out of our language, is what I think we have to do, and forget our labels. The past can't tell us this. Because as a matter of fact, the past is always talking about the people who tried to figure it out then, and so that's their version of it. And it's outmoded now. We have to find new ways. Look at nature. You hold a rose. Can you make one? No. Who made that? You can't tell me it's just a gene or a DNA strand. I don't buy that. And if it is, what informs that? What is the environment that informs one thing to be one thing and one thing to another? And where does consciousness come from? And how are we born? Do we come from other planets? I think any of that is possible. But to answer someone when they say, what is God? Well, God to me is a divining, organizing intelligence, creative intelligence that houses, if you will, the individuated intelligences of those who have come before us, like Buddha, like Christ, whoever you can think of, all these, like Einstein. Like being able to come up with a lost mathematical equation that I don't even know how to count. Come on, that's pretty wild.
The HeartMath Institute's Global Coherence Initiative uses scientific technology to perceive electromagnetic changes in the Earth's ionosphere that are coherent with global human consciousness. Because the human heart produces electromagnetic energies and even more powerful subtle energies, millions or even billions of human hearts experiencing profound emotions due to global coherence initiatives or global events will cause measurable changes in the Earth's ionosphere to appear. These changes will prove to science and the world the power of human emotions on a global and cosmic scale.
Our researchers and a team that they've assembled are building what's called the Global Coherence Monitoring System. This is a system that's being made up of very sensitive sensors that measure changes in the Earth's ionosphere. The ionosphere is the Earth's protective layer around the Earth. These sensors can measure very subtle changes in the ionosphere. The goal is, over the next 2 to 3 years, maybe a little longer depending on how fast the project moves, is we want to put between 50 and 100 of these sensors around the globe, have them all network back to a central location, and be able to get a complete picture of the ionosphere 24/7. Our belief is that when there are large numbers of people feeling similar emotions, mass emotional output, that could be detectable in the ionosphere. We know from other research like Dr. Roger Nelson and the Global Consciousness Project using random number generators, showing changes in these random number generators when there's strong emotionality occurring in the world, like at 9/11. There's other indicators that show that there are possible measurable changes that occur when large numbers of people are feeling something. We want to conduct experiments on the effect of positive emotional states being generated by large numbers of people on the Earth itself. In a sense, sort of metaphorically, what we're attempting to do is to measure the brain waves and heart rhythms of the planet itself.
By engaging our consciousness collectively into the global media and buying into the violence and the fear and all of the sensationalism, collectively with 6 billion minds on the planet, we are transmitting consciousness and reinforcing that delusion. We're giving it more energy. We're telling it to maintain itself. And possibly, scientific researchers are finding that our consciousness is actually cooperatively responsible for all this, because consciousness is far more powerful than we can even imagine.
The best example I see to explain it is like the movie Catch Me If You Can, where Leonardo DiCaprio hides himself around 10 beautiful girls, and the cops are all looking at the beautiful girls, and so he gets to sneak by, and that's kind of, we're completely being distracted while these other agendas are going on. And also it's putting us down constantly. It's saying, I'm better than you, and just a lot of biasness as well. And it's kind of sad that we're giving a lot of our time to watching TV and, speaking as opposed to action and being the change out in the world. Because the TV is always going to, report about, celebrities and what's going on in Hollywood and news, which is, only 2% of the world is really negative. And they're just focusing and amplifying on that, so it makes it worse than it actually is. And particularly if we know our thoughts create reality, if you have millions of people seeing these images, what's it doing to our world and our psyche on a collective level?
You asked the bigger field a question, and it feeds you the answer.
Absolutely, absolutely. But the question should be very precise. You can't answer questions, what does it mean universe? Right. What does it mean God? It will be no answer. But if you give precise question, then you will get precise answer. And then if you operate in some area, then situation will give you what you want by itself.
Through the practice of meditation, prayer, and insight, we can expand our minds and consciousness into the 9 levels of the universal field of the angelic kingdoms of God. The fields contain all knowledge, all memories, and all possibilities. All we have to do is access them with our minds. They have always been there to serve humanity and the universal knowledge and presence. Science is telling us that the 9-dimensional fields are perceptible to the mathematics of string theory. Science now realizes that there is a creative force in the universe that is intelligent, that it responds to our questions. It gives us creativity and insight as its intelligent answer. With these gifts that enter the mind, body, and soul, we can transform our world. With this new understanding of physics and consciousness, we can revolutionize our understanding of God. We don't have to forget what we already know and what we have learned from the past about God, but we do have to move forward and partake of what we don't know and learn more. If more of us can create an intelligent dialogue with the conscious universe, we might see more genius-level solutions to disease, suffering, war, architecture, banking, and global politics. We might even be able to conquer the limitations of fossil fuels, global climate change, and the ecology. If we can discover anti-gravity and the secret to limitless zero-point energy, we might see a golden space age where we will look back at our old ideas and wonder why it took us so long to build a global space presence and enter the galactic community of life beyond Earth. From there, the conversation can conquer the galaxy and beyond.